Director of Initiative to Promote Tolerance and Prevent Violence, Initiate.my. Mr. Irfan Amali, Co-founder and Executive Director, Peace Generation Indonesia, Peace Gen. Dr. Nurul Miza, Lecturer, Department of Psychology, Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences from RIUM. And also Eo Xiang Yen, General Secretary from Young Buddhist Association of Malaysia, YBAM. Welcome again. And okay, today, so I'll give a brief background on why we are organizing this launch and this webinar today, which is very important because, okay, so the spread of global terrorism from Islamist terror groups like Juma'ah Islamiyah and Daesh Islamic State has arrived at the doorsteps of Malaysia and radicalized the students and recruit our youth by exploiting their passion, curiosity, and anger about the world, religions, and injustices. Even though the movement collapsed, the ideologies and networks remain intact and agile to re-emerge in newer manifestations that might be emboldened by the global and domestic political developments. And we also have realized that there are loose or a non-existing mechanism to address this, especially in higher learning institutions. So hence, this webinar, we will discuss on problem of on-campus radicalization and recommendations for a more holistic and early response from the university administrations, hence Dr. Miza, and other stakeholders such as police, civil societies, organizations, and the campus community. We believe that they should play a collective and proactive role in tackling radicalization with a long-term goal of building campus community resilience. So just a bit of house rules before we started. First, please name yourself and also your organization on your name in Zoom, whoever that joined from Zoom. And please be respectful and keep discussion civil. You can ask questions either through verbal or through chat box in Zoom and Facebook. Okay, without further ado, I invite Mr. Aizat to present on his presentation.
Thank you, Ain, so much for that kind of introduction. Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon to our audience today who are, willing to spend some time to hear about an important issue in Malaysia, a very under-discussed actually, issue in Malaysia about radicalization. But before that, let me share my screen. Ain, let me know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I can see.
Okay, so so I have a long, slides, but I'm not going to explain everything today. It doesn't do justice to the topic, but we will send our audience today the link to the policy brief so that you can read on your own. But for now, the link is, we're facing technical issue on the on our website, so we will definitely email the policy brief to you right after the webinar. But for media friends, Hisham will email you the soft copy, the PDF version of it. Yeah. So today I'll speak about, I'll present the policy brief. What's the problem of radicalization on campus, and also what are the recommendations to improve community resilience. So basically, this is the structure of my presentation. We need to first understand the problem, then we can give recommendations. But from our policy brief, we, this is like it's not a in-depth research or whatever. It's just a policy brief that we did as a result of our consultation with PCVE experts and practitioners, also youth leaders I think in March or February, around that time. So and interestingly, during this consultation, right, it's not the people are shared, the participants shared about their opinions, but also their experience, their personal experience, because some of them, are former members of extremist or terrorist groups themselves, or know people who are a part of these groups. So it's very interesting intelligence that we gathered, and also input that we think we should localize, we should make it public make it known to the public, because not many people are aware of the issue, especially in regard to security issue. Because I think in the previous webinar we talked about how security is perceived as a state problem, not a people's problem, it's a social problem. So that's one of the reasons why we don't really talk about radicalization in our daily conversations. So an overview of my presentation is we think that it's important to recognize that in the past years, right, we have experienced a lot of waves of terrorism, global terrorism, especially Jemaah Islamiyah and also Islamic State, as rightly pointed out by Ain in the introduction. But what we don't really point out is that this the problem of radicalization also permitted in the higher education or in the campuses, where we see, for example, the relationship between the students and also the lecturers plays an important role in radicalizing the students or young people, and how some of the lecturers in the universities have links to extremist or terrorist groups, but that I will explain further later. And also what we have to recognize also is that majority of the Malaysian recruits in terrorist groups were under 40 years old. So if you follow the youth definition, right, in the old definition of youth, before the 2019 amendment during Pakatan Harapan's government, above 30 years old are still counted as youth, but now it's under 30. So we use both definitions to define during this youth during this period. So they play a lot of many roles as fighters, as recruiters, propagandists, fundraisers, and sympathizers. Mainly, why youth? Mainly because this part of this segment of population, how they are very passionate about making change, to stand for injustices, angry about corruption, angry about oppression, so on and so forth. So because of this vulnerable, I don't say that this is vulnerability itself, but it's more how the extremist or terrorist groups are exploiting people's talent, people's curiosity in changing the world. To do good for the betterment of the society, for example. Number 4, radicalization is a complex process. So we cannot, in radicalization studies, you cannot pinpoint, one factor, because of the religious interpretation. This is why people get radicalized. No, there are a lot of, factors, pull and push factors that I will explain later, that we need to recognize from the get-go. But because the problem is very complex, right? We need to, it requires holistic responses. It cannot, come only from the police force to nab people and put them in jail. No, we need to have more holistic, meaning that from the preventive, to counter violent extremism or ideologies. And also, lastly, I think this is also that we need to recognize. It's not that universities do not have any measure to tackle this problem, but the measures that in place measures are not enough, sufficient, not proactive enough to deal with radicalization. All right. So this is the spectrum that we use when we train when we do work with young people. We use this spectrum of radicalization that we developed ourselves. So I mentioned just now, I wouldn't spend a lot of time here. Suffice to know that there are 3-stage process of radicalization. It can start from fundamentalism, and then it will go to extremism, and the final product is terrorism. So what people do not understand, and especially policymakers, is that terrorism is the final product. It's not, no one is born terrorist. It starts from, the earlier process of it, how it develops the feeling of hate, justification of violence, so on and so forth, to act upon it. So there you go, you have a terror attack as a final product of this radicalization process, right? But then the process is non-linear. I need to emphasize that it doesn't go, one way. It can go many ways. It can go from fundamentalism to terrorism. It can go back to fundamentalism, so on and so forth. It's very fluid process. But the most important thing is that I will spend more time today is I will explain about pull and push factors. Why young people, especially on campus, become radicalized in the Malaysian context. So we divided it into three types of factors. It can be ideological, operational, and structural. Let's go to ideological. I think this one is it's not unique to only university students, but this is very universal to other populations who are being radicalized. So firstly, of course, it's about violent jihad against the enemies. So when we talk about enemies, it's not only the enemies, the Western power and all that, the non-Muslims, but also Muslims who are seen as less Muslim or transgressed Muslims, like Shia, especially post-ISIS world. We see a lot of sectarian sentiments against Shia, and also liberal Muslims, and any Muslims who are seen as not adhere to what they believe, basically. And secondly, Muslim victimhood. I think what unique to Malaysia is that the combination of religion and race. I think Iman Research has done research on this that I should quote here is, how youth radicalization is also influenced by ethnicity, not merely on religion, because in Malaysia, how Malay population are defined by the constitution to profess the religion of Islam as well. So you can see the ethnicity and also religion are intertwined. You cannot separate them. So how Malay is being oppressed under the domination of non-Muslims. So this narrative is being used to portray that you are being oppressed by these enemies, right? And then number three, I think glorification of extremist terrorist ideologues as heroes. Instead of, apart from just Shahid, to how people, the fighters are fighting for the religion, to die for religion, but also we need to understand the concept of ghurabat. So ghurabat, how even people, ideologues like Zarqawi, who's the founder of ISIS Iraq, although he's a minority among the Muslim world, he's seen as a perpetrator, as a evil, but he's seen as a ghuraba, as a minority, winning minority, blessed minority, in the ideology, in this kind of ideology. So even though you are being marginalized by the police force, by the government, whatever, you are seen as a holy or heroes to their eyes. But in this explanation, right, I really want to emphasize on operational, because this what distinct on-campus radicalization than other forms of radicalization. So we see, like I mentioned just now, you can see the relationship between the student and also the teachers or the lecturers. It's about like student-teacher power dynamic, how the lecturers are seen as knowledgeable persons, someone that you should respect. You should respect them because of their knowledge. So what they do actually, lecturers who have linked to terrorist groups and actively recruiting for members, what they do, in class, for example, they will introduce their students with the concept of jihad, slowly introducing them about the icons or ideologues in jihadist movement, and question a lot of issues, especially pertaining to Muslim affairs. How oppression in the Muslim world, injustices in the Muslim world, and from that, I mean, the lecturers are trying to incite the motivation to do something, to take an active action by participating in the extremist groups or terrorist groups. Right. So from the conversation that we had during the consultation, this can happen in the classroom, and also most of the time, if the lecturers want to have more private or secure conversation with identified or potential members, they will go to a designated place like mosque and private premises, and also they will have one-to-one conversation with their students. Another thing, a second one is how they operate is that kinship as social capital. So USRA is very popular in universities in Malaysia, especially. It's not just Islamic universities, but also non-Islamic universities, I guess. So social or religious learning groups, right? When the students are seeking for guidance to be more learned about their own religion, so they participate in USRA, or the small circle religious groups, to talk about Muslim affairs. This can be organized by students' movements. And also sometimes independent student movement who are not registered with the university. So they use this platform to build kinship as friends and also brothers and sisters during the session, right? But also more interestingly that we found is that how recreational activities such as futsal and also video games are also used as a platforms to build this kinship, to lure their friends or their peers to get acquainted with the movement or the ideology. So this is very interesting because you don't only use religion as a tool to create that social capital, but also current trends like technology, sports or whatever to recruit people. And Islamic students movements as a talent incubator, I have to emphasize this, and a lot of participants during the consultation emphasize this as well. In the universities, there are a lot of Islamist movement. When I say Islamist, it's closely related to political Islamist movement on campus. They might be a wing to Islamist political party, or just a branch of NGO, Islamist NGO in Malaysia. So they use this platform of Islamist movement in the campus to build their leadership, but also to build their network. Because Islamist movement is a regional and can be regional and also global network. What we found very alarming is that, of course, Islamic students movement, generally, they don't promote violence. They don't say that, our ideology is, to create Islamic State, to wage war against non-Muslims, non-Malays, whatever. That's not the case. They don't promote violence, but what we found out is that although some of their members, are part of these terrorist groups, the core leadership of this Islamist movement tolerated that, didn't do anything about it. Just okay, yeah. So a lot of things like that we need to unpack, the Islamist ideology itself, so on and so forth. But happy to answer that during the Q&A. For USRA as an indoctrination platform, so this is very classic operation. Like Hisham introduced earlier on, KMU, or the organization that doing this project, is was founded by former radicalized youth, and I I am one of the founders. So what happened is that USTRA is usually, like I said, it's very normal activity to do on campus, but it's not limited to MOS. Sometimes students are very eager about the cause, and they are willing to use their dormitories as a space to talk about this, to have USTRA, to talk about Muslim affairs. And most of the time it's to avoid university scrutiny, because in university as well, they have different religious groups, who are propagating different types of religious teaching. So to avoid this scrutiny, off-campus dormitories is one of the options to operate. But also off-campus private premises also can be used to do USTRA as well. So this is also to avoid scrutiny from the police and university. And lastly, I think this is very important, how internet becomes a catalyst to radicalization, because more and more terrorist groups know how to adapt in the current situation, using social media to recruit people. They can reach more people. But also, I think we need to emphasize here the adaptation of terrorist groups. Also, they recognize the secure platforms. So they won't use WhatsApp or more unsecured platforms which can be detected by the police or whatever. But think about Telegram. Think about Signal. Signal is a new, I would say it's a new communication platform that encrypted and cannot be detected by the police law. Yeah. And this one, I will just run through it. I think this is also very generic in other form of radicalization. But I think from the case studies that we see, most of the radicalization cases, some of them can come from poor family problem, harsh, live realities. Some of them face, harsh experience as a kid when their dad died at the early age. It's and poor family. It's very hard to get education. It increases the susceptibility of young people to get radicalized. And Malaysia, number 2, of course, you have enabling environment, which political parties are capitalizing on playing on the race card. Not only Malay, but also Chinese, other based on racism, which reinforces the narrative of perceived Malay Muslim victimization. Number 3, discriminatory laws and fatwas against minority groups. I think this is very important also. When we also have set of law that demonize and dehumanize Shia population and Muslim population, you also create this normalization. And also the lack of youth empowerment, although a lot of spaces perhaps, but think about how open are those spaces. Can youth still participate and are involved in the decision making? I think this is very it's a landmark case in Malaysia, that involves that depicts the student radicalization. Siti Nur Aisyah Atam case. She was convicted in 2016 and also subsequently in 2017. The court sustained the conviction for possessing 12 books linked to terrorism. But also, it's not just book possession, but also having the intention to proclaim jihad. And her relationship with her former supervisor, Dr. Mahmud Ahmad, played a huge role in radicalizing her. And also she was conscious of the content of the books. And also she also knew that Dr. Mahmud Ahmad and also one of the associates, Muammar Gaddafi, were involved in the terrorist groups. All right, so So let's go to recommendations. So we understand that the problem is very complex. It's not one size fits all, but what we can do is we try to propose 9 recommendations that we can discuss today. All right. So like I said, the responses that universities have now are not sufficient to prevent radicalization. So first, we propose to develop an early warning and early response system, or dalam bahasa Melayu, we call it sistem amaran dan respon awal, mainly to identify the early warning signs of radicalization and how to respond to it appropriately. But also, when we propose EWARS, right, this early warning system, it also localizes or democratizes the role, the responsibility to in security area. So we don't only rely on the police to monitor extremist or terrorist activities, but also we try to educate the campus community, students, and also administration to detect early warning signs, to participate, to monitor, to report any suspicious activities. But to do that, we think that it's important to build the capacity of the universities. Think about, Indonesia has done this. Some parts of Indonesia have done this with the communities, not the university, I think. But then I think with the neighbors and so on, they built a reporting system and also mobile application for people to report any suspicious activities. If you can see in the table, this is the concept of it that we can, further dive into. So you can see in the table, right? The early warning sign is categorized by the level of threat, and also you can also provide a proportionate type of response to the early warning sign. So we don't wait until the problem becomes serious, very high, but we identified, the early warning signs from the beginning. So, from the persons exposed to extremist propaganda to the extent of action to carry out violent attacks. But to put it in an example, I think, for example, if you look at the high, call for violence against specific groups, here, it's more, for an example to what I have put, in the previous slide, with the implementer, who should be responsible in responding to this issue, to this early warning sign. It's not absolute, the implementer part, but we can explore these options, in going forward. I'm sorry, I'm taking time. I'm about to finish. Number 3, I think conduct due diligence on staff and students. I think when lecturers or students are being appointed or being enrolled, the universities will only look at, or the Jabatan Perkhidmatan will only look at the criminal records of the staff, of the students. But we think that their sympathy or connection to terrorist groups are also needed to be checked. For example, I think one recent example, the Rizik Shihab, Indonesian from FBI organization, he received a doctorate from one of the public Malaysian universities. He's being charged by the Indian criminally charged, and also his organization was banned in Indonesia because of his intolerant view about Islam. But our university still hosted him and granted him a doctorate. So it's a question that we need to think about. It's how it could embolden, the extremist network, and how the communication between universities and also the police force should be enhanced in this regard. We think USRA should be regulated. improve community social media surveillance. I think when you have EWRS, early warning response, you can encourage students and campus community to report, and also so you don't have to rely only on social media, so you have a specific platform on it. Monitor book possession, but no blanket ban. This is something that we think it's important to address as well. Increase youth empowerment programs. So this is something that we will explore later more with Irfan, our next speaker. But we just want to point out our program recently. It's called Peace Lab for Youth. How we train young people, about peace and non-violence. So we adopted we used the framework of peace, youth, peace and security. More than 40 young people from diverse ethnic and also religious background participated in our Peace Lab for Youth. So we exposed them about human rights, radicalization process, and how to do counter narratives projects. We also engage with wider stakeholders from government, enforcement bodies, so on and so forth. So to give them a lot of exposures. And out of this program, about more than 14 counter-narrative projects were produced, and some of our participants also become an active advocates for this issue. And I think and some of them did a partnership with another groups of NGOs and brought this further. So we think we are very thankful of this, and I think this should be continued, and the university should allow us access, should cooperate with civil society as well. So I think in conclusion, I cannot read everything, I'm running out of time, but in conclusion, we think to move forward, we need to increase multi-stakeholders cooperation and to develop holistic approach, sustainable capacity building. You cannot have one-off, especially to train campus community about early warnings, safeguard academic freedom. It's important. This is something that was emphasized during the consultation, where universities always clamp down on activities that are against the mainstream interpretation of religion, or the demands of when they receive pressures from the radical groups. So they would shut down those programs from the university students. So this is very crucial to provide platform for young people. And lastly, I think in conjunction with the government effort to build a national action plan to prevent extremism, they should also increase budget and increase the role of the universities to address this problem at their level. You can find our policy brief on our website. Like I said, it can only be downloadable, I think, later after the webinar. This was our previous policy brief. And lastly, this is our report that you can read. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking time.
Thank you so much, Aizat. Thank you for talking about the elephant in the room. And thank you for starting this courageous conversation, because we all knew that it is actually very rampant, and the lecturers, and there's a network inside the universities, and it has been happening for a long time, that we need to start discussing now. So then we move to know more about our neighborhood group. So I invite Mr. Irfan. So the question to Mr. Irfan then is, in your opinion, what is the problem of youth radicalization and on university campuses in Indonesia? And in your experience, how to promote on-campus resilience? And can you provide us some programs example, and how do we measure the effectiveness of the program? So over to you, Mr. Irfan.
Okay, thank you. Is my voice clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. Thank you for the occasion, for having me here. For answering the question, actually, several explanation from Brother Aizat is quite similar, quite similar with what we have in Indonesia about the pull factors and about the push factors and personal factors. So let me show you one of the latest research from INFID in Indonesia, but the research was packaged using the video. So I will screen the video and I will explain about the finding of the research. Okay, I will share the videos.
Waktu SMA, Lala termasuk tipe siswa yang cuek dan urakan. Tapi, sejak masuk bangku kuliah, Lala berubah. Kini, Lala rajin ikut mentoring dibimbing senior-seniornya. Di mentoring itu, pikiran Lala dibukakan, mulai dari masalah ketidakadilan hingga penindasan. Dalam berbagai obrolan, Lala sangat vokal menyalahkan kelompok-kelompok tertentu yang dia anggap biang kerok. Teman-temannya kadang tidak nyaman dengan cara Lala yang gampang menyalahkan. Cara berpikirnya hitam putih, salah benar, kami, mereka. Akhir-akhir ini, Lala sering menggugat Pancasila yang katanya tak sesuai dengan ajaran agamanya. Lala memimpikan sistem baru yang sejati. Pola pikir Lala berada pada derajat keempat dari 5 derajat radikalisme yang dirumuskan tim peneliti INFID. Lala tidak sendiri. Tim peneliti INFID menemukan kasus dengan pola yang sama pada riset di 10 perguruan tinggi di 7 provinsi. Melalui wawancara mendalam terhadap 143 unsur di dalam kampus, para peneliti mengukur derajat radikalisme dan pikiran dan tindakan, keluasan penyebaran, dan potensi lingkungan yang memungkinkan tumbuh suburnya radikalisme di perguruan tinggi. Dari 3 indikator tersebut, diketahui bahwa derajat radikalisme di perguruan tinggi sangatlah beragam. Pemahaman radikal ini pada awalnya dari mahasiswa yang terpapar di luar kampus. Namun belakangan, paham ini juga menyebar ke dosen dan pejabat kampus yang secara tidak langsung mewarnai kebijakan kampus. Ceramah di masjid-masjid kampus, buletin, banner diwarnai narasi-narasi khas kelompok ini. Proses orientasi mahasiswa baru, pengenalan organisasi intrakampus, serta mentoring menjadi sarana efektif yang digunakan untuk proses rekrutmen, pengkaderan, dan penyebaran paham radikal. Fenomena radikalisme di kampus bukanlah fenomena yang berdiri sendiri, tetapi terhubung dengan jaringan yang lebih luas di luar kampus. Beberapa responden menolak disebut simpatisan ISIS, meskipun jika dilihat mereka memiliki afiliasi dengan orang-orang yang mendukung ISIS. Di satu perguruan tinggi juga ditemukan sivitas akademik yang menjadi anggota dan pendukung NII. Pasca dikeluarkannya Perpu Ormas nomor 2 tahun 2017 serta kebijakan penanganan radikalisme di kampus oleh Kemenristek-Dikti, kegiatan yang bermuatan radikalisme di 10 perguruan tinggi menurun drastis. Namun, itu bukan berarti paham radikalisme hilang, tapi hanya mengalami pergeseran dari dalam kampus ke luar kampus. Karena itu, pemerintah perlu mengambil sejumlah langkah nyata seperti melakukan asesmen komprehensif terhadap perguruan tinggi di Indonesia, mendorong perguruan tinggi untuk melakukan sosialisasi untuk menumbuhkan kesadaran dan kemampuan deteksi dini benih radikalisme, penguatan pendidikan karakter dan kebangsaan, afirmasi dan pemberian intensif bagi inisiatif dan kegiatan kampus yang mempromosikan nilai-nilai toleransi.
Yeah, the survey was conducted in 10 universities in Indonesia, the biggest 10 universities, and you can find that most of them in the middle of the degree of the radicalization, and some of them in the high level, and some of them in the low level. And I would like to share to you what we have doing for last 3 years in 2 universities in Indonesia to interfere to give the influence about peace building, peace education, and critical thinking and empathy education. Yeah. This is the program, we call it a FROSH. Why FROSH? Because, let me see it to the full screen. Yeah. Yeah, FROSH, it means from the freshman. So mostly the radicalization come to the first years of the students, because in the first year student is very vulnerable. They are new students. They has not familiar with the environment. So there are many dakwah, mentoring, or liko, or usro. Yeah, you call it usro. And so as the counter narrative, so we create this kind of the mentoring, but we deliver about the empathy and critical thinking. Why? Because we found that mostly people are radicalized because they have very low critical thinking and empathy. So we address about empathy. So this program, we are conducting in two biggest university in Bandung, ITB and UPI. Yeah. And we reached to, this is in the first years, and the second year is still going on now. So this is the first year. The program is funded by USAID. So we reached 200 people, students in from ITB and 200 from UPI. Yeah. After several focus group discussion and research and finding out what we should address or we should provide in terms of the content in peace education or in preventing violent extremism in campuses, in university. So we found that there are at least 10 contents or 10 materials that we have to deliver. The first one is about the identity understanding, because most of the people are radicalized because they have a confusion about the identity. Am I Muslim? Am I citizen of Indonesia, or I am citizen of the Khilafah and everything? It's about the understanding. And the second one is the emotion management. So mostly people are radicalized because they are very vulnerable in terms of the emotion. If you see how the propaganda works, they use the emotional propaganda about how we are Muslim, are victims, like Brother Aiziad mentioned about the victimhood, playing victim. This is about the emotion. And we include also the time management. Actually, it is not related with the violent extremism issue, but we put it here because it is demand from the university. So we combine between the PVE content with non-PVE content. And the second one, the next one about the information management. Actually, it is about the critical thinking about how to respond to the hoax, to propaganda. So we teach them how to be resilient to the propaganda and provocation and the hoax. And the next one about the healthy friendship. This is about how to build the relationship, healthy relationship, because most of the people are engaged in the terrorism because they have very low quality of relationship. In the last case in Indonesia, who conducted suicide bombing in Indonesia, in Jakarta, actually she has no friend. She has no friend in the neighborhood or in the campuses. And the next one is about the staying away from fanatism leading to violence. This is about the fanatism. And the next one about the citizenship, how to be citizen of the country, citizen of the world. And the last one is about the violent extremism group. It is about how we teach them about the violence in the world. And the last two is about the design thinking. So we push them how to analyze the problem and to come up with the solution. And they also in the last content is about the conflict resolution, comprehension, and becoming a peace agent. So these are 10 modules that we deliver within 6 months to the first year's student of university. Since they are millennials and Z generation, and which are who are gamers generation. So we package the program, became like a game. So we gamify the process. We use board games and online games and the application. So when we join our program, it seems like join the journey of the games. And it is very, very appealing and interesting for young people. And we can see that the attendance rate is very high. The attendance because many programs has the attendance very low because program only speech or only discussion. But our program is playing, not preaching. We are playing. We involve the game designers to create the program, the games, and in the games we insert the value of critical thinking, about the empathy, about the collaboration. Yeah. And this is the impact measurement. So actually we measure at least two factors. The first one is the critical thinking scores. And the second one is the intention to conduct violence. So according to our measurement, that the critical thinking is increasing and the intention to conduct violence is decreasing. Yeah. Actually, there are several factors that we measure, but we only show two factors that we measure. And this is their impression about the program, about the satisfaction rate, about the impression of the program. And also we conduct several interview to confirm the data that we are collect using the survey. So this is the story of change of some of the participants. And this is the last year participants, and now they became the facilitator for dispatch. So they become the agent of peace in their campuses and their university and also in their community. Yeah. And now this is the second year and we are entering the third year, and Alhamdulillah, the government sees our program as the good model to be implemented in the wider community. And now me and my friend in Peace Generation are hired by the government, and the program is adapted to be implemented in the campus Nusantara, module Nusantara. So this is the modules that compulsory for a student university to learn about the diversity and peace. And now we are training 1,000 lecturers of university, and they will assist, at one lecturer will assist 20 student of university. So the total of student university will be reached in this program is 20,000 students in Indonesia within 1 year. And the program will be at least 3 years. So the program will be delivered to all over Indonesia, to young people in Indonesia, student university, and hopefully the critical thinking of student of university will be increasing, and they will have the resilience to the provocation, to propaganda of the violent extremism group, and it will help to decrease the terrorism number in Indonesia and will build peace in Indonesia. That's all from me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Irfan. It was important for us to note that people can become extreme through network and also through mentoring. And these two are available abundance in university. And it is very interesting approach that use a gamification. We know like modern technologies take over youth interest very much. So yeah, it is a very successful program that we in Malaysia should consider to implement as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so now I would like to invite Dr. Nurul Miza for the next session to share her question. Before that, I just have a simple announcement to everyone that Dr. Miza might need to leave at 3:30 p.m. So please type question for her on Q&A section or on the chat below. So the question to Dr. Nurul Miza is in your opinion or experience, how to increase collaboration between universities and civil society organizations, for example, like youth associations, NGOs, to promote on-campus resilience? You may also share like best approach to build trust to the students, and what are the reception of students and lecturers alike? Because we also know that lecturers are also involved in radicalizing the students as well, some of them. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Nurul Miza.
Thank you, Ain, for the introduction and also for the question given. I would like to thank Initiate.my as well as Community Muslim Universal for inviting me today. So in addressing to your question, the big question, we want to know what university can do more, and specifically what Malaysian university can do more, because I feel that what we learned a lot from Brother Irfan's just now, how Indonesian universities, like we had 17 universities are engaging, and even the lecturers are actually taught how to like engage with students and then like, prevent radicalization from happening. Since my background is on psychology, I think it's best that we understand how radicalization process occurs from the psychological process first. We want to know why are the students are willing to engage, even like maybe even the lecturers, like how does radicalization occur, why is it the vulnerability is already there, and if we know and understand the root cause of it, maybe we can better understand, create an awareness program that hopefully can minimize the effects or minimize the success of radicalization that could possibly occur in the university. It is indeed concerning when we think about it, like, you know, because when we think about, like, for a lot of us, maybe like 90% of us, when we think about extremism, it's sort of like a far away thing, because like we are afraid of it, we perceive that it is wrong. But there are individuals who perceive that it's the right movement. You know, with this vulnerability, it indicates that there's a willingness to engage. And when we talk about Malaysia, we still are, I would say that there's still a lot that we need to do. There's still a lot that we need to do in terms of increasing awareness, and also like especially within the university, because I remember when I first started my PhD, when I was doing on risk factors of radicalization, one of the remarks I received during my presentation to a conference was that Malaysia has a problem with radicalization. This came from an academic member, and that left a remark for me to this day, because there is a lack of awareness. So we still need to move forward with that. What do we do? So in the root cause of radicalization, what makes, even among the youth, especially our university students, and even like, you know, those who are leaving from high school, you know, what is the root cause? I look at it from the relative deprivation perspective. This is by Ted Gurr. Now remember, these students, as well as the ones that are just leaving university, they just come into encounter with the real world. This is the time of independence. This is the time whereby they start to learn and take more notice of political incidences, like religious, like racial issues, social issues. They become more aware, and they're trying to engage with independent thinking. So this is a step towards freedom, the freedom of independent thinking and freedom of action as well. So at this time, considering that's the first step, you know, there's like questions that coming about with them, and under relative deprivation, the amount of questions that could be asked is that, like, what do I deserve in this world? You know, deserve to do, deserve to think, deserve to commit, you know, and like, you know, the rights that I should have. That is what is known as value expectations. And another question is that they can ask is that, what do I get and what can I get? What I actually get. You know, this is referring to value capabilities. It's referring to the fact that, you know, can I actually have that? I deserve it. Can I have that? Can I have it? You know, and if there is a mismatch between this, meaning that the expected idea is not equal to what they can actually get realistically, it could lead to frustration. They feel like, hey, I'm getting my independence here, I should be able to do this, but I don't get it. And I'm not just saying about behavior, I'm saying about even thinking, like, you know, even like engaging with people, befriending people, all those things. You know, and this could actually lead to violent actions, but not necessarily violent actions. Of course, when we're talking about ideology, when we're talking about radicalization, we're talking about ideological and fundamentalist ideology, the dichotomous thinking, the us versus them, and then, like, you know, either this or that, violence or non-violence. So what are the types of deprivations? I was mentioning just now about how like they feel that what they deserve and what they don't get. It can be various things. And there are two categories under the deprivation category. The thing that they could think about, feel like the vulnerability factor, is that from the real, is the first type, real or objective, is when they have constraints, physical constraints, such as poverty, low educational attainment, and lack of political influence. The other side of it is the perceived or subjective. So this is when there's a subjective reinterpretation of the world that they're seeing around them. They feel like they've been unjustly treated. Now this could be both real and objective, because they have been unjustly treated. And they feel that such a way whereby they have been discriminated against due to their race, their religion, and their gender. Going back to Brother Irfan's mention just now about like, they don't know about like who they are. Are they Muslim or are they Indonesian? This is a common denominator for a lot of especially Muslim extremists all over the world. Like, like even in the Western nations such as Netherlands, German, when they first began to be engaged in violent extremism groups or like ideologies, they have this dissonance like, who am I? And am I being treated right in the first place? Okay. Another one is that they could see, like, begin to empathize with others that they deem equal or similar. Like for example, like we have a lot of cases in Malaysia, especially the current threat is that we see the deprivation that is happening to people who are like us. Like for example, Muslims in the Middle East nations who are currently oppressed, or even those who share equal values to them. They feel like they are being oppressed, and I feel equally oppressed as well, because those are my people over there. The last one is that they felt threatened by potential loss. This is the most interesting, because they haven't lost it yet. And when we're talking about like a lot of movements nowadays, they feel like, what if that right is taken from me? When we're talking about like one instance, that Malay supremacy, what if the Malay rights are taken from me? Right, so this has been like being disseminated around, and it creates this heavy mentality that that creates like vulnerability to extremist movement, to extremist ideologies. And like the last thing that when I want to talk about the risk factor is that like, but why youth? Why youth specifically? When I teach in my classes, I always talk about, among us, like, not among us, pardon me, among the younger generations, among you within the younger generations, is that you're still developing, you're mentally still developing, and that's why you are actually incredibly vulnerable. Why are you vulnerable? It's because when we're looking at the neural network inside the brain, what we have is that for younger generation, their emotional network is more developed when it comes to decision-making process. But the other network, the higher thinking network, what we know as the cognitive control network, develops later. The cognitive control is the one that engages in the critical thinking aspect. For the emotional network, on the other hand, it is the one that responds to immediate gratification. So in the case whereby we have like, when we have this perceived like deprivation, we feel like what is happening, and we look at like how to solve that problem, like either from emotional path or cognitive control path. For younger generation, they are likely to go towards the emotional path because their brain is still developing. How do we address this in the university? Considering that they are of course vulnerable, the key, like joining us, the university has to be aware that the young individuals are vulnerable to this, but who are like targeting them, making them vulnerable to this, is something that we need to be aware of. All right, we need to know the narratives that they use, the kind of words that they use, so that we understand how they use the risk factors of radicalization to lure people in. There is also the romanticization of the extremist movement that actually engages with that vulnerability itself. So this is coming from the extremist movement itself. We need to be aware of this from the university management perspective, and then to engage, to build the trust between CSO and university, and also we need to basically create a wide movement. If you want to engage with university, if any like NGOs or like CSOs would like to engage with university, first of all, we need to understand why they are involved in the first place. And then we need to also understand what's our target goal. Having the same idea on what we aim to achieve at the end of the day. We want to overcome extremism, we want to overcome radicalization process. And we need to have a synonymous understanding what is extremism and radicalism. I think this was actually addressed by one of the participants. Do we actually have the shared understanding? Do we all equally understand what is considered as extremism and radicalism? Do we understand, like, you know, is it about violence? Is it about particular ideology? And suddenly all of a sudden we have this new movement during the COVID-19, anti-vaccination, anti-masking, to the point that it could lead up to riot. You know, so these are the things that we need to be aware of as well. Do we have the same understanding what is extremism and radicalism? Is it just Muslim extremism? And then the last thing is that we need to have a promising impact, of course. And whenever you're trying to engage with university, trying to create programs, trying to create like, what is it, like, you know, like empowerment movement, it has to have like a realistic outcome, but not just realistic but also impactful. So the goal is just beyond awareness. We want to at least have this progressive path towards peaceful society's cohesion. You know, we don't just want to end an ideology. That's not that. I don't think that should be the main goal. The main idea is that we want to end this like division between us, the idea that violence is accepted. We know that as a society, to progress, we need to actually have, like, you know, peaceful unity. And then at the same time, we hope to have at least, like, you know, even when there is differences of opinions, we could at least have engaging discussion, and at the same time, like, you know, progressively move towards, like, you know, a better path. But I think at least what we could have one, like, you know, one shared idea is that violence is definitely not the answer. So when it was suggested what kind of programs can we do, I think the easy answer is always awareness program, and I don't think we have enough of that. What we can do is that to improve the awareness program. And then the second one is the empowerment program. How do we improve of it? One of the participants just now asked about, like, you know, the cutting of budget. This is a significantly like, you know, like it's a significant issue that is affecting, like, universities and also basically like a lot of education institutions. You know, we are incredibly important, but however, like, we always face restraints of budget cuts. But I feel that, you know, we need to take advantage of technology and media. You know, taking advantage of technology, like, you know, awareness program shouldn't just like come about from like physical activities, but also at the same time, when it comes to university, like recently, I'm not saying that this is the most ideal way, but there are alternatives to what we can do at the university level, which is that, like, you know, we try to get our students to actually like build the awareness program. You know, because what happens is that when it has like this awareness program that is mere lecture, engagement is lessened. You know, because it feels like you're teaching us what we need to do, when in actuality we want you yourself to feel empowered by it. We want you to actually embed with the idea that, you know, this is what's happening, it shouldn't happen. So how do we move forward for this? With such a program whereby we have this, like, you know, student-centered learning, is what we call it, you know, they can feel as if that, you know, they can be part of the change. So all this deprivation that we talk about just now, they feel like, oh, this is the way I can be engaged, this is how I can put my energy into it to make changes. So effectiveness, like in terms of like getting an effective programs for PCBE, these are actually some of my suggestions. First of all, we need to understand the culture of the community. Like, you know, understand the university culture is important. Understand the culture that the individuals come from is important. And I think Brother Irfan has a, like, you know, like an incredible work that he has done. You know, that it showcased that he actually understands, like, you know, what the students are possibly thinking to prevent them from engaging in radical extremism. Second is like to be aware of the community social background, educational background, and the last thing is that to be aware of the ideological threat. I feel that we need to actually be like constantly updated, like, you know, because there's always like new movement. For example, like in the times of COVID-19, we had extreme movement of like you know, anti-health, like, you know, anti-health policies, you know, like likely because like of crisis. You know, whenever there's crisis, people become vulnerable to different thoughts, and suddenly they feel that they have difficulties to believe, and they create this dichotomous thinking. So it's important that we are always aware of ideological threats so that we can better address it. You know, understanding what are the fundamental ideas that are actually less prevalent that could cause a potential threat to the nation and to the community at large is incredibly important. So when it comes to empowerment, it's like, I think my final say to this is that sure, we can create a lot of awareness program, we can create various things. The first thing we think about is, of course, building creative and critical thinking, because we want to make sure that, you know, these independent thinkers, they start to see that, you know, I can think for myself, but at the same time I need to make sure that I at least think about other people around me as well. And then the second thing is that something that I think is like what we need so much is that social cognitive skills, the skills to be able to relate to other people, can actually help us to empathize with other people, sympathize with other people as well. And then we could also like understand that we don't live alone, because the reason for violence occurring, sometimes we feel that someone doesn't understand us. That's the us versus them, which is a big phenomenon within the extremism movement. I am me and I'm with us. You're you and you're with them. You're not part of me and you're not part of us. That kind of creates this dehumanization practices, and eventually feels like it doesn't matter to me if I'm being violent to them, and doesn't matter to us because we're safe. You deserve the violence. So if we could build these social cognition skills, it's possible that we can actually, like, you know, empower our youth as well as empower our community and building that resilience. So hopefully we can potentially achieve, you know, how about we empower even our CSOs and universities to work together to actually empathize, understand what the others are thinking, having these shared values. Hopefully we can actually like prevent violent extremism from actually permeating in our society. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nurul Miza. We were lucky today to have Dr. Miza because she's one of our champions, and we hope there are more lecturers and university staff out there to be the champion for this course. Dr. Miza highlighted a very important aspect of it, which are a shared goal and shared understanding we should implement so that we can get these people to move towards more peaceful approach and like abandon the more extremist or negative group or mindset. And yeah, Dr. Miza also mentioned about the which Irfan mentioned before, the critical thinking and also psychological intelligence, the EQ and IQ are very important to be developed and nurtured in the university, especially where it's supposed to be nurtured in universities. So without further ado, I would like to invite Yeo Xiang Yan for his session. So what is your opinion, or with your experience, how to increase collaboration between universities and civil society organizations? And you also lead a civil society organization, youth, to promote on-campus resilience. What are your take on what is the best approach to build trust and how the lecturer and students' relationship on these issues should be like? So yeah, over to you, Yeo Xiang Yan.
Okay, thank you to our moderator, Ain. So before I officially start, I would just like to give a quick introductions on where do I come from and why am I invited to share during this section. Okay, my current background is that I'm still a postgraduate student at University Putra, Malaysia, so I can share from the perspective of a student. And I'm also serving as the General Secretary of one organization under Registrar of Youth called Young Buddhist Association of Malaysia. And I'm also the Executive Committee of Malaysian Youth Council. So I will be sharing with all the guests here on my experience being a student and also a leader in this youth and religious-based organization. Before I start, I would just like to give an introduction on my own organization. Because today I'm representing Young Buddhist Association of Malaysia. We are a national youth organization with 272 member organizations all around Malaysia. And then we, apart from having state liaison committee in all the states and federal territories, we also have two standing committees that exists in the Institute of Teacher Training and also Cities Environment. So this allows me to have some insights on what actually happens inside the university campus. Like we have this Buddhist Undergraduate Coordination Committee, BUCC, and under this BUCC, we have connections with the Wasiti Buddhist Society all over Malaysia, whether they are registered or they cannot register inside the campus. So quite often we receive feedback from the attitude of the management towards religious-based activities, or sometimes even just student activities. We don't talk about religion as a focus, but as a student activity, what is the attitude and perception of the management towards it? And then we also have this trainee teachers coordination community, and we also receive a lot of feedback that students' activity could be very dependent on the management attitude as well. Some of them try to officially register their Buddhist society under the Institute of Teacher Educations, but there are mixed results depending on the states and then the attitude of management. So this is just to provide a background on where do I come from. And going straight to the point, I think I saw a few questions in the chat box as well on the definition of radicalization. So did some homework on that. It seems like it doesn't seem to be a universally accepted definitions at the moment. So I'm just using the reference provided by Hafiz and Mullins. It refers to a gradual process that entails socializations into an extremist belief system that plants the seed for possibility of violence, even though the component of violence is not a must in this context. And it can be quite relative and dependent on the context, like in different countries or even in different states, we could have very different definitions on radicalization. And when I first came across the initiative of the Initiate Mind, because I was one of the participants of the Peace Step for Unity, the idea we get is that, because just now from what Isaac shared as well, sometimes we think that, is it radicalization only a topic of concern among a certain race of religion in Malaysia? Because normally we hear about the penetration of Daesh and then some jihadists and so on. But what is the perspective of other main religions of faith like Taoism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Baha'i faith on the concept of radicalization? This one remains unclear, because for Buddhist populations in Malaysia, when you talk about radicalization of Buddhists, we normally associate with the situations happening in Myanmar and also Sri Lanka. But that one actually, religion just play part of the role, and there are still many other factors in play. There are political concerns, there are economical concerns, and so on. And then when we talk about radicalizations or even terrorism and even violence, is it too sensitive to be discussed among universities? Because it seems like among public and private universities in Malaysia, there are also different attitudes on this aspect. And lastly, also I see on the chat room, there was a question whether universities are currently equipped with the resources to handle radicalization in university awards, because just now we talked about installing a alarm and monitoring system as well. So it's important that when we look at the cooperations and even the possibility of cooperation between universities and CSO, we need to understand the current realities happening, whether at IPTA or IPTS. I'm using my experience in IPTA. We can feel that there's, in general, defensiveness on conservativeness on any issues that can potentially lead to unwanted discussions. Therefore, it's no surprise that whenever we try to talk about religions, we try to talk about racial tensions and so on, it's not that we want to argue about it. It's just like you cannot oppress an environment, oppress people from not knowing about the actual context. But there is no platform or channel available for them to be exposed to these particular issues. Yes, therefore, because of many concerns, like whether this can bring bad reputations or bad publicity to university or not. That we could feel that there is a mindset of organizing nothing is better than inviting negative headline. We have this mentality among the parties responsible in the university. Most of the time is student affairs division, because they are not sure, and then they don't want to take the responsibility whether there can be any disciplinary actions or any unwanted public relations crisis they will need to handle afterwards. And then there is also different perceptions on what are controversial and what are sensitive among the campus as well. Therefore, in most campuses, I would say, we deal with this type of priority because the environment doesn't facilitate this type of information sharing and even information exchange. That's why CSO could possibly play a more proactive role outside the campus. And then secondly, there's also a general lack of understanding. If a CSO want to cooperate with university, there need to be some process of introductions and getting to know each other, because we understand that university have their own concerns and reservations, having partnership with CSO associated maybe with regions or races or agenda related to it. We can see that it can be quite convenient to have relationship, like for example, banking institutions to arrange for financial literacy programs, arrange with IT companies to arrange for IT related competence training. But when it comes to race and religion, and even sometimes it just like radicalization, it doesn't concern only one faith. It can be linked to humanitarianism as well. But this is still very subjective, and it seems like our education blueprint doesn't have a clear instructions on how we should proceed with it, how open-minded university management could be on this aspect. And then there's always this worrying concerns on University and University College Act, AUKU 1971. We heard assurance from the previous administrations that it's still currently under review. And then it's mostly the political associations that could cause this act to be brought out times and times again. But then it seems like it is giving university management the sole and too much power to control what students and students' activity can do. Because sometimes it can, the activities themselves can be not of political nature, but because the disciplinary team is up to the university management, then it put the students in a very difficult situation, because whether the students want to fight for the cause and risk having their academic qualifications and even the rights to continue their educations to be put on hold and so on, this remains a threat to the freedoms of students to engage in this type of activities. And then we also think from the perspective of the management and even the staff in charge of student activities in university. When there are new cooperations between university and CSO, there are extra workload and extra resources need to be allocated to that. And then the procedure, from what I understand, can be quite challenging as well. Some of them, the student affairs division can decide themselves. And then if some of them they think are too sensitive and require more clarifications, they may need to bring it to the vice chancellor meeting, the senate meeting. So it makes the whole transformations and even the minor changes in mindset and mentality to accept this type of cooperation not very conducive at the moment. And therefore, in order to build trust and then to open up the possibility of collaborations among these universities and CSO, we need to acknowledge the realities and work through the realities. Like first of all, the purpose of cooperation. Like for those with common agenda, for example, health, for example, career competence, and so on, we normally see no issues. The university are quite happy to cooperate with corporates with certain reputations and proven track record on a certain competence. Like I see the Maybank with the financial literacy program, it can easily go inside the campus. But for those agenda with potential to be interpreted as sensitive, sometimes even interfaith dialogue, because the dialogue is supposed to facilitate understanding on the theoretical level. Sometimes this type of dialogue is also seen by the management as having the risk of being put in the headline for unwanted reasons. And therefore, we need to think about what we can, the type of corporations we can propose, whether it can be co-organizing, whether it can be supporting unit, or whether the university can just help to relay the invitations to the university students, or they can even resort to informal circulation of events. But there are times that we really reach an impasse and couldn't really penetrate into the campus. We need to explore two other possible modes, because we understand that educational reform and even the management reform within the university campus sometimes is quite, I think, impractical in Malaysia due to some political realities. But nowadays, we have the advantage of having the online platform. For example, students wanting to participate in this webinar session today, they do not really need an agreement between university and CSO. We can make good use of this to expose the students to this type of activities. And then also the CSO can organize off-campus activities, because this can take away the burden of the university to bear the responsibility, like University A, or this activity is held in University A, then that means University A endorse this particular ideology or this particular political party. By doing this, we can take the pressure off the university and allow the students to participate in another way. And then when we talk about trust building, these are just a few procedures that I have to go through as well. Later, I will share some actual experience. I work with universities on behalf of CSO. So apart from those principles like openness, transparency, and so on, the most important thing is that we try to address any potential backlash or sensitivities, or there's important things on not having hidden agenda. Because, for example, like for some religious or even racial-based organizations, maybe we just try to do some activities focused on common good, focus on welfare. Then we need to, our CSO ourselves also need to make sure that we do not really carry the agenda of politics or even religions into this good cause. And then also CSO need to do their homework. We need to make sure that we provide the profile and purpose of the organization or activities, because sometimes the staff and management may not know about our organization. Therefore, we need to make it quite clear that what the organization stands for and what are the possible sensitivity as misinterpretation that may occur, and what are the responsibility of each party involved in these cooperations. And if possible, also we provide the credential of the organization, speaker, facilitators, to provide as much information needed by the management to have a better understanding of these organizations. And then we also need to do a lot of homework, because trust building is not only settled in a single meeting. We also, apart from official courtesy meeting, we need to have a lot of formal and informal follow-ups. Like we need to provide them information and updates from time to time. What are the modules we use? What are the best practices we follow? And then what are the recent cooperation of this organization with other parties and so on. Then we can even go the extra mile. Like maybe this organization have a certain cooperation with a reputable news company, media company, or even with ministry. Then this can help CSO to have a certain type of endorsement before they discuss further cooperation. It's kind of like an interview sessions of CSO to the university management as well in this context. And speaking from the perspective of lecturer and students, why do we need to do this? We know that entering campus is not easy, but why we want to do this? And what are the roles of lecturers and students in it? Right? Lecturers nowadays, I can see that they are not opposed to those course, subject, and industry-specific cooperations. Like I myself is from the community nutrition background. Therefore, cooperations with food and beverage industry such as Nestle, Danone, Dumex to have a career talk and so on, it is not controversial at all, and we welcome these cooperations. And so the next step for us to think is what happens to the other not so common agenda like unity and so on. So this is where a advisor of university clubs could play an important role, because the KPI, the key performance indicator of lecturers, shouldn't be only within the campus. We should also encourage these lecturers to have exposures in organization outside. I think later I will share an example of my cooperation with UCSI, because I have this relationship building outside of the campus. It makes cooperation within the campus much more feasible and much more convenient. But the most important things for, I think, not only the lecturer, but the university management is that we need to recognize the limitations of classroom and in-campus experience. We need to recognize that there's a much bigger ecosystem outside the campus. Therefore, if we claim that we want university to produce graduates of high quality and open-mindedness, then we must be prepared to have this cooperation as well, to facilitate these cooperations to happen, to expose the students to a wider worldview. And what can students benefit from these cooperations? It helps to complement the learning experience from their existing curriculum. We don't want students to only focus on learning, because there's life outside of the campus, and unity, harmony building is not done through assignments or not done through the course of hubungan, and then we do some interview outside and then we produce a report. It is far more complicated and involve more factors compared to that. And then we also want students to open to new possibilities, because there is life after university and there is learning outside the campus as well. And by doing this, they can build new forms of competence, relationship, and understanding. So it's also, university can slowly pivot towards making even interfaith of interreligious cooperations and another of their key KPI. Because if you set KPI for universities, they can be quite, like, for example, nowadays the publications, the publication is the main KPI of, especially in PTA.
Thank you, Mr. Eo. Maybe you can continue the sharing during the Q&A session. Thank you so much. It was a very detailed and thorough presentation, I have to say. And Mr. Eo covered from operation to system, and most important thing that he proved to us that though that it is a long winding road, it is doable and possible to organize the support system within the university system environment itself. So thank you so much to all the speakers for your very thorough and very depth intervention today. So we move to Q&A. We have a long list of questions. Thank you to the passionate audience that asked a lot of questions. So I have summarized the questions to a few segments. So the first of all, the two first questions that I invite the panelists to answer was the most fundamental question that someone posed today is, what are the definition of extremism in Malaysia, especially to use in our climate, our situation and context? And there are audience that also raised about Ewer's presentation. Maybe Isaac can explain us more about this. How doable is that, considering there is a budget cut from the universities, there's a political involvement, and someone also asked about the monitoring process, how to do the monitoring and also save the students from being radicalized and not just monitor, and also not affecting or demonize other groups that are not radicalized, their image. So yeah, maybe we can start with Isaac.
All right. Thank you for that question. I think to address the first question about budget, yeah, of course. I mean, in Malaysia context, you have university budget cut and all that. But you know, in our policy brief, we think that how universities can leverage to have more allocation to focus on PCVE, prevention and counter violent extremism, is by since the government is developing the national action plan on preventing and countering violent extremism, and they call it NAP-PCVE. So this is the national plan, national focus priority, and it's also mentioned in the 12th Malaysia plan. So it means, and the government has put higher education, Ministry of Higher Education, as the main partner in this 5-year plan. So I think this is one of the reasons why PCVE and university budget in regard to focus on PCVE should be increased, and should be the government should think about this. But also, you know, how we should also promote more sustainable, or like funding sustainability for universities, right? So this is why collaboration and partnership with CSO is important, because, you know, like international grants, and also to produce high impact projects, you know, in promoting inclusivity, and also de-radicalizing students, to build a monitoring system, for example, is very important. You know, of course you cannot rely on government's budget as solely, but from this collaboration, you know, it can also you know, give a financial source, resources for the university. But also, I think to answer the question of effectiveness of early warning response, I think more research needs to be done. We propose EWARS early response. You know, we want to detect early warning signs, and also to provide proportionate response, early response to that. So we don't wait, you know, terror, violence to happen when our students to join terrorist or extremist groups, but we monitor students, we monitor extremist activities from earlier on. But how effective is that? I think it depends on how, you know, it's the development of the early warning system. So in our policy brief, we emphasize that the training, the module should not be sectarian, you know, should be objective. You know, people who are monitoring it should be people who are trained in PCVE. So a lot of things we need to think about, but we need a system that you know, monitors this kind of activities, because it's we call it's a clandestine. It operates in secrecy. Not a lot of people know. So monitoring system will help. I think I wouldn't answer the question, the definition of radicalization. I think Yao has clearly pointed it out, and I also pointed out in my presentation how it's a spectrum from fundamentalism, extremism to terrorism. So violence, you don't need violence to prove radicalization. Merely hate, developing hate, you know, to discriminate others, to force others to believe in the same belief system, it's counted as radicalization. But of course, when it comes to state defining it, which one is radical and all that, we need to monitor. We need to hold the state accountable, because human rights defenders also can be defined as violent extremists. So more consultations with CSOs, with non-state actors need to be done to have holistic definition or objective definition of radicalization, so we don't abuse the law. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Ms. Yao, and then Irfan. Please make it short and precise.
Sorry, just to recap, this is in response to which question?
In response to first definition of radicalization, and then like how to do monitoring that also include intervention, so that you save that person from being radicalized.
I see. I think the definition part, as Isaac mentioned just now, there is no university accepted definition. But in terms of the intervention process, I would just like to share one quote from French Enlightenment political philosopher, Mr. Baron de Montesquieu. Because if an intervention should be enforced inside the university campus, and I think it's also one of the coming question as well. if there's a certain individual advocating for radicalization in the campus is a thought management, what can be done to it. And unfortunately, we live in a reality that university management has high authority and almost independent of parties outside. Maybe they answer to Ministry of Education, but a lot of powers lies on the university management. Therefore, we do not have the correct separation of power inside university campus. The legislative and the executive powers in the sense of law of university and the law of civil law, they are not really separated in university campus, in the context of university campus, and even in our own system of running this country. Therefore, it lies this sad reality, because nowadays university campus, the management can just judge based on their own jurisdiction and their own interpretations, and students are always exposed to this with the threat of having their academic qualifications stripped off. That's why we also wish to hear from the attendees to that as well, what can actually be done on it to slowly enforce some changes to the aspect. Thank you.
Maybe Mr. Irfan want to touch on definition of radicalization and also how effective monitoring of radicalized group can be done.
Yeah, actually for the definition, I think has been explained by many speakers, and there are several different, there are many different definition of the radicalization. We have in Indonesia, we use that they are the spectrum from the empathy to tolerance, intolerance, radicals, and to the violent extremism or extremism. So, but everybody can has their own definition. For monitoring system, so in Indonesia, we have developed the early detection system. Actually, we applied it in the community context. So we have at least 2 villages in Indonesia that we are trying to implement the early detection system. And the women, the women are the champions to be the agents in the field, how to detect the conversation and how to detect the people who are alienated themselves. And also we have developed the application for this, like report system. So report system. So to build the community resilience, there are many agencies, and we have several indicators of the attitude, the relationship. At least I think there are 3 factors about the relationship: the ideology and the attitudes. So we measure of these 3 indicators, and the agent will report with the several do no harm system, yeah, and we can collect the data and we can analyze the data. So we have been implementing this in West Java and the eastern of Java. Also, we have the now we are developing the system in the campuses. So we train these tools to the students to enable them to detect their friends who are exposed by the violent extremism or the radical views. So this is like the peer monitor or peer counselor also. So we emphasize in the social emotional learning to handling this, using the social emotional learning as a tools to be a counselor, to know better or to know deeper about the condition of the students, because mostly the pull factor, the push factor is about mostly it's about the personal factors, like about trauma or the problem in the home, problem in the study. It's not also about the ideology. Like Brother Aizat said, this is not only about the ideology thing. There are several factors and including the social emotional. So now we are developing the tools for the campuses, but it's not done yet. But hopefully in the coming year, we can develop these tools and can be implemented widely in the campuses in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irfan. It was very impressive that PISJAN identified quantified the indicators and also developed a tool to monitor the radicalization, which we can also look forward to develop it here, because it will help also to understand it and approach it in an objective manner. So thank you so much. We will go to the round 2 question. So round 2 will basically touch on law and internal mechanism on check and balance. So I'll quote some of the question on law. First is like, why are the law in Malaysia sufficient to tackle extremism and radicalization? And is the education blueprint is sufficient to tackle untoward extremism? So that's in law and mechanism. And also for internal check and balance mechanism within university compound, is that how do you report your superior if the superior is radicalized? So that is a very legit and realistic concern. So I hope these 3 esteemed panelists could address that questions. So maybe we will start with Mr. Eo first.
Okay, thank you, Ain. Possible methods that we can explore in this context is that, because now we talk about whether there's a reporting mechanism when there are any superiors in the universities are found to be associated with such actions or influence within the campus. I remember reading a paper from one of the local researchers proposing an interfaith commission. This commission can be, it will comprises of representative of subject matter expert in this context, and also can be of independent nature compared to leaving everything to just university management. Therefore, I am just throwing this idea out, whether it can be feasible or not within the campus context, to leave this matter to another independent panel, and not the final decision lies in the university management. And in doing so, it can at least facilitate the process of reporting, and then an independent investigation can occur. This is more towards the reporting side. And then I also opine that there should be an institute or school or academic inside the campus, or it can be a collaboration with CSO, but I can see it's quite challenging to identify the correct ones from the perspective of university. Whether there can be an ongoing educational process that can organize activities like closed-door dialogue, closed-door forum, or just casual discussions on certain regions of racial-related matters inside the campus. Or else, if we do not provide this type of platform, if we just suppress this, and then we don't have a platform that people can trust to make reports or to have discussions over it, then it doesn't really create a healthy environment, and can even foster more drastic and radical actions within the campus. That's all.
We want to invite Mr. Irfan on the mechanism of check and balance. Or we can invite Ms. Aizat first to answer.
Okay, I think on the question of law, this is our point. Law is not enough to counter to counter radicalization. We need law, of course, when it comes to terrorism, right? We have POTA, POCA, SOSMA, and all this. But the point here is we think that this law cannot address radicalization. I think it's universal. Anything, you cannot only address it by law. Of course, law has rehab, preventive aspect of it, but in changing attitudes, in changing mindset, it cannot do that, holistically. So that's why we that's why in counterterrorism history, counterterrorism measures shifted from military approaches to more soft approaches, from hard approach to soft approach, which means to prevent violent extremism through education, through social activities, so on and so forth. So that's why I think education and early warning system and also training around it are very important, because we cannot rely on the police only to prevent violent extremism. It's a responsibility of every citizen to make sure that its country, its campus is safe from extremist activity and of course from violent attacks. So that's why I think when we talk about national action plan, when we talk about early warning system, these actually democratizes the responsibility to prevent extremism, not only the state but also the society. The society should take part in promoting resilience, in promoting diversity. So so I think that should answer the question of law. But in place mechanism, I think in Malaysian University, so far what we found out from our consultation is that the university only when there's a problem of extremist involvement of a lecturer, for example, the universities will report it to the police to take action, using the law, using the anti-terror law. And at the same time, I think if there is any suspicious activity in relation to extremism, not to the extent of like high risk violence, maybe involvement or teaching violent elements in class, for example, the students actually can report. There's an in-place mechanism for it. I mean, staff affairs, should take into consideration and do a disciplinary action to inquire about the lecturers, right? But I think this is also a survey that was conducted. I cannot recall right now, but there's a survey about asking students in Malaysia whether they know ISIS and whether they can distinguish ISIS with other Muslim groups. And majority of the respondents cannot even tell the difference between ISIS and other Muslim group, and they have no idea what ISIS is. Meaning that how can students report to university without knowing that it's actually wrong to perpetuate violent jihad. I mentioned violent jihad, against other minority groups, or to fight in Syria, so on and so forth. So that's why when we develop early warning system, we need to have training, to equip students, the campus community about how to use this, how to report. What are, like Irfan said, what are the indicators that we should, early warning sign that constitutes a radicalization. So, yeah, that's all.
Thank you. So, maybe we want to hear from Mr. Irfan. What is your opinion about how do we set up a mechanism, check and balance mechanism? For example, like what if staff want to report the superior that are radicalized? How do they do that? And maybe law, because we were talking in Malaysia, so maybe you can touch on Indonesia law.
Yeah. In Indonesia also we have the problem in this case because so many prejudices towards the police, also toward the CSO. Like me in CSO who are working on countering terrorism, some of the Muslim groups accuse us as the part of the government that address Muslims, because so many Muslims are feeling addressed by the issue of terrorism. So that's why when we mention about the counter-terrorism in Indonesia, it's very sensitive. Violent extremism is very sensitive. It means that you accusing Muslim as terrorists like that. So, so it is very sensitive. So that's why when we enter the collaborate with the university, we don't mention any words related to terrorism, extremism, everything. So we just use the words like peace building or tolerance or the 21st century skills. It's about the critical thinking. because there are so many prejudices related to these issues. It's very sensitive issues. Because also we have to recognize that the government sometimes that they use their authority, superiority to determine this group is radical, this group is not radical, this group is extreme, like this. So there are so many problems in many sides, including in the CSO side, in the people side, in the government side. But Alhamdulillah, thanks God that in the last 3 years, there are many laws produced and so many CSO active in the balancing this. For example, the human rights activists, they make the like balance for controlling the in Indonesia we have Densus, yeah, like a special police for this. So because some of the police, they use their power to capture some people they are accused as the terrorists without any proof, like this. So also in terms of the social media, in terms of the media, there are so many balances. I think people now more aware compared to the last 3 years. Now people more aware, more mature in facing these issues. In the maybe last year we launched the action plan RAN-PE, Rencana Aksi Nasional, ya, Rencana Aksi Nasional of Preventing Extremism. So there are many rules that prevent the abuse, prevent the overpower, and to empower like the victim, empower the ex-terrorists, empower the civil society. Now I'm grateful that now we are working closely with BNPT, Badan Nasional Penanggulangan Terorisme. Yeah. So we are working just like yesterday. I was invited to deliver speech there. So we are fortunate in Indonesia that we are working closely, and the police and government working more empathically to the people, and also people more aware to this issue. And the community, they start building the resilience to tackle this issue. So alhamdulillah in Indonesia, in this issue it's much getting better compared to like 3 years ago.
Thank you so much for the answers for all the questions that have been posed. Thank you everyone for passionately commenting, attending, and interacting. So we will have one simple poll for everyone to fill up. And also, I would like to invite all panelists to give your concluding remarks. So over to you, Isaac.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Lending us your ears. But my conclusion is this. Radicalization is a real problem, and it's a very serious problem. But we cannot address radicalization if people are still close-minded, do not want to collaborate with other stakeholders, such as civil society, because this is a collective effort for everyone. To make sure that everyone is safe. We love our country, of course. We want to live in harmony, so on and so forth. But there's always, groups that perpetuate hate and also violence. So we need to collaborate in order to prevent this kind of problem. So I think partnership is very important to move forward, and everyone should be on the same page when it comes to countering or preventing violent extremism. And remember that violent extremism or radicalization is a process. No one is born extremist and no one is born terrorist. It comes from a lot of stages of radicalization. So it's very important to prevent it from the early stage. So thank you so much, and we look forward to work with anyone who are keen to work with us. Yeah.
Thank you. We will have one poll first before Irfan and Yo conclude. So I will let my colleague to do his poll. Okay. Okay, I would like to invite Mr. Irfan to conclude.
Yeah, I think radicalism and extremism is not something new. It's been there in our history for a long, long time. It's not about it's like a virus. The problem of virus, it's not virus itself, because virus naturally will be there. But how we build our resilience. Virus will not have place in our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Irfan. So we move for concluding remarks to Mr. Yao. So over to you, Mr. Yao.
Thank you, Ain. Just two quick short points. The first one is that radicalization, we could have different interpretations and definitions over it, but to gain tractions and to make it a large part of this Malaysian community, we need to figure out a way to make it a common agenda for all Malaysians. Therefore, I believe the team of Initiate is working on it from face to face on this aspect. And then secondly, the university, we really need some form of rethink